For this video, what I want to talk about is applications, and specifically applications for quadratic equation. Now, as with any story problem, what we should do to solve the story problem is the same. So, as usual, we should start out by reading it, write down the important information, determine what we don't know, and then solve for that unknown by converting it into the mathematical language and solving the associated equation. So what I want to do then is really just show you an example that relates to the quadratic equation, and then we'll take a look at that and see that that application can be solved using the basic story problem solving techniques. So for this one, I'm going to talk about a problem where during the first part of a trip, Tara drove 120 miles at a certain speed. So Tara drove 120 miles at some speed. And then it says, Tara then drove another 100 miles at a speed that was 10 miles per hour slower. Then another 100 miles at 10 miles per hour slower. If the total time was 4 hours, what was her speed on each part of the trip? And so we want to know her speed on each part of the trip. So just like in the past, when we work on any other story problem, we're going to break it down. So we know that she drove 120 miles at some speed. Well, we don't know what some speed is, so let's call this S. And then another 100 miles at 10 miles per hour slower, so then this must be S minus 10. And total time is 4 hours. So I like to put this in a table. So we have her speed, we have her distance, we have her time. We have the first time she drove 120 miles. She drove it, and we don't know how long it took. So we'll just leave that there for a second. Let's just call it, well, I'm just going to leave it. And the speed is S. And then she drove 10 miles per hour slower, S minus 10. She drove 100 miles. And altogether, the total time was 4 hours. So remember that when we're working out problems like this, we know that speed is equal to distance over time. So speed times time is equal to distance, and time is equal to distance over speed. So that means that this time right here is really 120 over S, and this time right here is really 100 over S minus 10. And if we add those up, we get 4. So 120 over S plus 100 over S minus 10 is equal to 4. So I'm going to erase and work that out and see if we can figure out why it's a quadratic. So we get 120 over S plus 100 over S minus 10 is equal to 4. We're going to multiply by the least common multiple. So the least common multiple is S times S minus 10. When we multiply this by this, the s's turn into a 1, and we're left with 120 times S minus 10. When we multiply this times this, the S minus 10's turn into a 1, we're left with 100S. And here we get 4 times the quantity S times S, which is S squared, minus 4 times S times negative 10, or sorry, 4 times S times 10, which is 40S. And then we kind of work this out. We get 120S minus 1200 plus 100S is equal to 4S squared minus 40S. And then we get, so this is 120S plus 100S is 220S minus 1200 is equal to 4S squared minus 40S. And I'll subtract 220S from both sides. And I'll add 1200 to both sides. And I'll get 0 is equal to 4S squared minus 260S.
1200.
1200. And the next step that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to divide by 4. So if I divide by 4 on both sides, then I get 0 is equal to s squared minus 65s plus 300. And then I'm going to actually work this out by using the quadratic formula. So s is equal to negative b, 65, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 65 squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. And what I end up getting is I get that this is going to turn into 65 squared minus 4 times 1 times 300. Actually gives me a perfect square, so 65 plus or minus 55 all over 2. 65 plus 55 is 120. And the second one is 65 minus 55, which is 10, divided by 2, which is 5. I'll put 10 over 2, which is 5. So I get 60 and I get 5. Those are my two solutions. Now, the one that doesn't make any sense is 5, because the second time she drives 100 miles, and she would do it negative 5 miles per hour. She'd be driving backwards. So the one that makes sense is 60. Now that's what s is equal to. So if s is equal to 60, then she's going 60 miles per hour when she went 120 miles, and then she goes 10 miles per hour slower, 50 miles per hour for the second half. So the answer is 60 miles per hour for 120 miles, and then 50 miles per hour for 100 miles. And so that's the final answer for this question.